Right, good evening everybody. Welcome to tonight's Planning and Control meeting. Just before we start, can I ask you all to either switch your mobiles off or put them on silent? There has been a slight change in circumstances, I believe. 20 Welney Close, due to some information missing, has been taken off tonight's agenda. So we will be looking at it again, hopefully in January. Just like to apologise to Mr. Ghafoor and Mr. Harris for coming in. I wasn't aware that there had been a problem. Yeah, not if I see you first. Okay, thank you. Moving on to the agenda. Apologies, anybody from anywhere?
Mike Carr's
Thank
not
you.
available today.
I believe we had an apology from Matthew Holmes. Yeah.
Chair, I've also got...
Sorry?
It's his birthday, apparently,
Chair.
Chair, I've got late apologies from Councillor Tracy Pearce as well.
Okay, thank you. He's a clever one, that Matthew, and he didn't turn up in case he has to buy a rounder. Late items to be introduced by the chair. Well, there's none that I have. Declarations of interest, anybody? No? Minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of November. Ian?
Just a point of clarification. Mr. Gibbard is mentioned in the attendees. It was Mr. Thorley who was here. So I do apologise for that, Chair.
Does it look alike?
No.
No. Yeah, minutes of the last meeting, then, okay.
Move, Chair.
Second, thank you. Minutes of the meeting of the Conservation Heritage Advisory Committee, which was held on the 13th of October. Thank you. Appeal decisions, I believe Ian's going to tell us about them.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There's a few to go through, and some of them have generated some issues, so I'll just go through them relatively quickly. The first one, Kingsway Park Close, it was an advertisement appeal. It only related to one sign out of a batch of 4 signs for a particular business, and we excluded one of those signs by condition, and they appealed against that condition, and the inspector allowed it. He wasn't overly concerned with the visual impact. It was attached to a residential fence, providing directions to this particular business on Kingsway Park Close. So we lost that one, but I'm not unduly concerned about that, Chair, because there was only a relatively small concern there. Second item, 107 Darley Abbey Drive. This appeal surrounds the proposed change of use of a dwelling to an architect's office. Proposal is in a residential area, and permission was refused on 2 grounds. Namely, the proposal should be in the city's central business district as required by policy, and it was also refused on the impact on the character of the area by virtue of the introduction of a small business use. In relation to the first issue and policy CP11, that policy is engaged because it carries significant weight given its high degree of consistency with the advice in the framework, which tries to consolidate office uses within the central business district for obvious reasons. In relation to that, the inspector concludes the appeal property is a bungalow in a suburban part of Derby. It lies well outside the city centre and the CBD, and it is not in an employment or regeneration area or a defined centre. The appellant is unable to demonstrate the proposed office would comply with the sequential test as set out in policy CP11 and the framework. Moreover, there is no indication that the proposal would safeguard or enhance the vitality of the city centre. As such, it would go against the justification for that policy. So that's a good policy. Although it's only a small-scale proposal, it obviously supports that policy, which is an important policy when directing uses into the right part of the city. In relation to the second issue on character, he had less concern, and so it was refused on the basis of the sequential approach, which is good, a good support for that policy. Third one, Chair, on the list. 43 Hillcrest Road. This appeal surrounds a large rear extension to a residential bungalow and a detached outbuilding in the rear garden. The development has been constructed in line with the submitted plans, and the case officer and enforcement officer have been very actively involved in dealing with the development for some time, so it's taken some energy and some resource. We refused it under delegated powers, and the relevant policies are policies GD5, the General Amenity Policy, and Policy H16. And the inspector considered the merits of the proposal, and in particular the massing impacts of the extension relative to the neighbour at number 45. He was fully supportive of our concerns and dismissed the appeal. We've now issued an enforcement notice, and very recently they've appealed against that notice, and so officers and our enforcement officer will be engaged in dealing with the grounds of that appeal, and we'll report back on that. But it's just to demonstrate in this case, Chair, that a relatively small-scale householder job has generated quite a lot of work. Fourth item, 129 Hawthorne Street. We refused permission for a single infill dwelling in this residential area. It's quite a compact, well laid out residential area with some consistent character in its layout and form. Permission was refused on the grounds of the impact on that character, and the inspector very succinctly deals with the issue in his decision letter, where he states that the building would introduce a more modern and arguably standardised take on a two-storey detached dwelling into a street scene of older buildings, which would, despite taking reference from features around it, appear incongruous and disrupt the original quality of neighbouring pairs of dwellings. So it's a good support of our policy and stance in that particular case. And the final one, Chair, you'll all know about 46 Quorn Drive at Alastry. I can see Councillor Potter wincing there on the second row. It's been to committee a few times. We've been to site. The inspector went to site. It's quite a lengthy decision letter, which I'd encourage you to read. And it centres on the appeal against conditions 2, 4 and 5. 2 relates to the permanency of the business, essentially. That was a temporary condition. 4 relates to opening hours, and 5 relates to an appointment scheduling that's required. And you'll be most interested that there are various paragraphs in there that relate to the operation of the business and the need for clear justification for refusing permission for it on a permanent basis. And of course, in his deliberations, the inspector allowed the appeal. And so we've got a full-time hairdressing salon there at 46 Quorn Drive, with all the associated safeguarding conditions that were included on the original permission, together with the varied conditions 4 and 5. So I would encourage you to look at that report, Chair. And I just wanted to pay a bit more attention to these particular appeals this time, because there has been quite a lot of work going into the various items. So happy to take any further questions, Chair.
Questions, anybody? No, you've explained it well. Well, overall, we didn't do too bad.
We didn't do too bad.
Yeah, so we're on a winner. Okay, moving on to applications to be considered tonight. The first one is 3 Anfield Road, pages 1 to 8 on your report. To tell us about that is Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Housekeeping item. Please note that your report does not specifically state that Councillor Pandy commented on the proposal, although the substance of his comments are summarised along with the other comments received. He was on the list to address the meeting, Chair. In terms of the main report, to summarise the merits of this proposal, I'll quote part of the officer opinion, which states, the proposed change of use may intensify the residential use of the site and so may result in additional activity from visitors and staff. This intensification, based on the evidence provided and given the limitations of the site and capacity of the building, it has 3 bedrooms, is likely to be comparable to a level of activity that could be expected from a medium-sized family home. Although it is possible that there would be a limited spike in activity at staff changeover times, to argue that this would constitute unacceptable harm, as per the test in Policy GD5, would not be a sustainable position in my opinion. Regarding the living environment to be created, each bedroom would have access to daylight, ventilation and internal and external space. It is my opinion that the implications of the proposed use for neighbouring residential plots would remain within reasonable limits and that a satisfactory living environment would be maintained for occupants of the application site and neighbouring plots. Overall, it is my opinion that the implications of the proposal for residential amenity would be acceptable and in compliance with Safe Policy GD5 of the CDLPR and paragraph 130 of the framework. I have nothing else to raise, Chair, and would invite the councillors to address the committee.
Thank you, Ian. I believe the first speaker is Councillor Whitby. You have the usual 3 minutes.
Wonderful, thank you, Chair. Yeah, Chair, not all children's homes are the same and not all children's homes are a problem. But this property being semi-detached is a completely inappropriate building for such a development. The applicant makes no secret of the behavioural challenges presented by its residents who will be undergoing assessment, which leads me to assume that they'll be coming from something like a secure unit style accommodation. Directly across the road from number 3, Enfield, is a detached house for vulnerable adults. Children with behavioural difficulties and vulnerable adults are not a good mix. This is a major red flag. The report states that parking isn't an issue at this end of Enfield Road. I don't know what time of day they visited, but it really, really is, mainly due to the university in Markeaton Park. There is some parking on site, but the applicant states that visitors to the site will likely park down the street, and there's a reason for that, because they are concerned for their own vehicles. And they can park a minute down the road and then go home, but the residents at number 1 have to live with this threat 24/7. And by the way, the suggestion that staff will park at the Markeaton Park car park is laughable. You may well say these kids have got to live somewhere, and yes, in this case, I'd say they should live in Northamptonshire. Amazingly, this application comes with a supportive document from the Northants Children's Trust, who are clearly very happy to place their most challenging children 50 plus miles away in Mackworth. And why are they happy to place their most challenging children 50 miles away in Mackworth? I'll let you decide. Clearly, the issue of noise and noise pollution is something the applicants are very aware of because they revised their original application to include triple glazing and sound enclosure panels. But trust me, no amount of mitigation is going to prevent the residents at number 1 Enfield hearing the fire alarms going off and the children being restrained. On so many levels, this is high risk, and if you nod this through, there could be a children's home coming to a ward via Northampton near you. Don't encourage them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Whitby. Councillor Pandy.
Yeah, I agree with the points made by Councillor Whitby on this. The parking is going to be a main issue, and they said the staff changeover, there would be more vehicles coming to this property, and that will create again more parking problems. They also say that the occupants would be using bikes, but it seems like that's a red herring, because I think once the occupants come in, how would that be? How is that going to be enforced in a way that the occupants would be using bikes or they would be walking? So the parking is going to be a major issue, and what we have seen with the assessment homes, there could be noise and nuisance issues. So with the noise, as Councillor Whitby stated, the mitigation, I don't know how effective that would be. With the nuisance, we have seen lots of Mackworth, we have seen a rise of such properties. So and we know what kind of issues arise from those properties, as we have seen in the recent past. How would that be taken care of if there is like antisocial behavior arising from the property? Then how would that be addressed? And again, going back to Councillor Whitby, like you said, there is the elderly residential not very far from this property. So mixing two things, is it a wise idea? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pandy. Ian, would you like to come back to 1 or 2 questions from each councillor?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The issue of the safeguarding management, the nature of the assessments that take place, they are obviously subject to separate legislation. We're looking at the land use planning merits of it. You may know that some of these small-scale children's care homes have been dealt with under certificates of lawfulness where they've not constituted a material change of use. This is something that Stephen and I have been engaged in terms of trying to weigh up the different merits of cases. In this case, we felt it needed planning permission because of the fact that these people were being assessed on on a relatively quick turnaround basis, hence the application. But we still feel that with the proposal for up to 2 children, the nature of the relatively low level of staff that are required to accommodate them, that you are making a judgment based on, you know, what would you expect if you had a larger family situation in this particular dwelling house? You could have, you know, a family of parents with adult children, or an extended family of elder relatives, or whatever the family mix may be. And so we felt that on its merits, given the level of on-site car parking, the fact that it's in a residential area, and the overall nature of the land use planning merits, that we could grant or recommend that permission be granted for this. The other side of the coin, of course, where these children are placed from, I can't obviously comment on that. Again, it's something that is beyond the sphere of my influence, and I would only say that we are looking at this in terms of those components, and not where those children have originated from, Chair. In terms of antisocial behaviour, of course, that would be regulated again separately via Ofsted, or whomever would be involved, and or the police, Chair. Chris is here if he wants to comment any further on the parking merits of it.
Christopher?
Nothing particularly to add. When I was out on site this morning, there was clearly enough space for 3 to 4 cars, and our view is that there's not going to be a significant impact on the highway as a result of the proposal.
Thank you, Chris. Just before I open it up to all of you, let's not look at where the children are from, because we send our children to other authorities as well. So with that in mind, anybody want to make any comments? Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. I just want clarification that this is a C2 use, which is a residential institution. Presumably, if it were to move from being this applicant with children, it could be transferred to somebody else, or this applicant could use it for a different residential institution purpose. So I think we need to think, if that's true, then we need to think about this not just as being somewhere where kids are going to be, but somewhere where there will be people who are living in a supported environment, and not just think of it too narrowly. I don't think that makes a difference to what I'm considering, but I think we just need to be mindful if that's the case.
Ian?
Condition 3 deals with that, Councillor Kerr. Condition restricting the use of the property as a children's residential care home, in brackets use class C2, for occupation by up to 2 children, with staffing arrangement as specified within the supporting statement. So it ties it to the submission.
Thank you. That's reassuring. So we know what we're dealing with. It is a semi. Personally, I think it's a corner plot. It's the bungalow opposite it is not facing directly towards it, so it's fairly. Given that it's in a really residential area, it's not in anybody's face, and I think that's a good thing for something like this. It's got on quite a big plot of its own, which I think is also helpful, but it is a semi, and the party walls of semis are to varying standards depending on the construction and the time it was constructed. There are 2 bedrooms there adjacent to the party wall. If somebody is feeling like jumping up and down on their bed or hitting the wall, it could be quite noisy for next door. So I just wondered if there'd been any assessment done as to that party wall and acoustic considerations. If it hasn't been done, then I think we could condition it so that it can be assessed as to whether that would be an issue or could be an issue, and to condition some work to be done on that wall to ensure that there isn't a noise transmission problem for the neighbours from internal noise.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Look, it's a party wall, so whether there's 2 children who are supervised or a family that's living there, you know, there's nothing to stop the children from a family jumping up and down on a bed, and there's nothing to stop these people. But Ian, is there anything that we can introduce?
I mean, if members felt it was an issue, if as you say, you've pointed out that a normal family could have similar impacts through those party walls, but if you were so minded, a condition I think would be stretching the bounds of reasonableness, but we could give it a go if you were so inclined, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Chair. The concern I've raised in the past relating to this type of development is around parking, and I think in this case the ratio of staff is 2 to 1, so that it's identified in the documentation that you have 4 members of staff there at any one time, and those 4 members of staff could, looking at the picture, be accommodated for their parking needs on the front of the property there. But it is the other professionals who are visiting, and we know children with high needs. There will be social workers, there'll be medical professionals of various types. So they will be parking on the street in the vicinity, which is my concern about it. The fact that it is a semi-detached house as well is also a bit of a concern. I think ideally you would want a detached home for this sort of service, really. In terms of disturbance for the next door neighbour, I'm not sure if they're one of the objectors, but yeah, could well be. Thanks, Councillor Whitby, for clarifying. And the other thing of concern is the fact that the placements are relatively short term, so those children will be there for a number of weeks and then moving on, and then there'll be another cohort of children who will be there, and that doesn't make for a sort of a settled neighbourhood, and perhaps we might expect more problems in those circumstances than we would from a family residential property. So I do have those concerns about this application, Chair. Thank you.
In terms of the timescale, Councillor Rawson, I mean, 8 weeks or whatever they stop there. They're there for a purpose, and hopefully within that time, the sort of purpose will be served, and they can be sort of rehoused somewhere else. But we can't really just say, well, they're only here for a short term and what have you, because people rent a room for 2 months and then leave. So I don't believe we can take that into consideration. Anybody else would like to say anything? Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Rawson, actually. It is a concern. And on page 2, it says, as stated on the application form and supporting information document in line with Starbright's Good Neighbour Policy 2022, Starbright proposed to encourage its employers based within Derby to switch short car journeys to cycle, walk or take public transport to help protect the environment and to reduce the carbon footprint. Is there anything we can do to assist in this encouragement by Starbright for their staff?
Ian?
Travel plan?
If that would assist.
Do that by condition.
Thank you.
Would that placate you, Councillor Potter?
It would indeed, Chair. Thank you.
Anybody else? Would somebody like to move it?
That's started with the additional travel plan, yeah.
Chair, I'd also like to know if there's support for putting in a condition about the party wall and checking its acoustic properties.
Would that be okay, Ian?
Yeah.
Okay, would somebody like to move it with the additional conditions? Okay, all those in favour of the recommendation?
1, 2,
Is that 6, Stephen? Yep.
Yes.
6, Chair.
All those against? 1.
1 against, Chair.
Thank you. That recommendation is carried. Now, as stated, Welney Close is off, so we're going to 1617 Friargate, pages 20 to 38 on your report, and to tell us about that is Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay? Just a couple of housekeeping updates for members. Members may have seen a supporting statement from the agent, Lathams, which was circulated yesterday in support of this application. We've also received a statement from one of the objectors. It came in after the reports were circulated, so I've been asked to read it out to you instead. So if you can bear with me, I'll read it out to you. This is a representation from Rebecca Cadman-Jones, who owns the Coach House at 14 George Street, currently leased and occupied and operated as a yoga studio, open 7 days a week, 50 people visiting each day. The Coach House currently shares the courtyard area to the rear, with a legal right both for storage and emptying of bins, also as a fire exit route. Because of this, our greatest concerns relate to the introduction of the 2 new builds in this area. These 2 new properties are only 1.56 metres away from the rear elevation of the studio at its nearest point, and the council have acknowledged that this would lead to a loss of light. I am concerned that this loss has not been given due consideration. This relationship would also provide direct views into both the new build and our studio. The bedroom windows would be directly overlooking into the yoga studio and vice versa. They do not have windows to the rear due to the retaining wall, so their only light source would be front windows. This is absolutely no privacy for either party. More so, there is a covenant on the land registry details which requires there to be no loss of amenity to our property. This cannot be met. Our loss of light will be considerable. This covenant does not seem to have been adhered to by those submitting plans to the council. Environmental Health Officer stated that the noise assessment should be carried out and that good acoustic design is essential to mitigate potential conflict between residential development and the nighttime economy. I would agree with these comments and would suggest that no planning permission is issued until this impact is fully understood and these mitigation measures are agreed. The windows into the Coach House are in the main, in the back of the property. The plans show a commercial bin storage area up to the outside wall of the studio to store 6 commercial bins. The space required is not accurately annotated on the plan. Total area required for 6 1,100-litre bins would span 7.8 metres, almost the length of the wall on the plan. This would cover our fire exit door. If moved further down, this will reduce the pedestrian footway and emergency exit route through the site to an illegal distance. This leads to uncertainty whether the proposal can fully be complied with or comply with recent building regulations and fire safety requirements. Please bear in mind there could potentially be 5 apartments plus 1 HIMO, say 15 people plus staff and guests in the restaurant. Say 70 plus 25 in the yoga studio at any one time. This is potentially 110 people who could use the emergency exit route, which in parts would reduce to just over 1 metre in width. With a frame, the bin store would almost meet the end wall of the new builds and would not allow the size of a bin to pass. The Highways Authority have suggested a service management plan to be conditioned. However, this is not included within the report to committee. The bins are also higher than the lowest point of our window, which would increase our loss of light. Any open lids would smash against the window frames, introduce odours into the studio. We also cannot maintain our windows or wall if a bin store is built against it. Whilst I agree it is not practical to provide parking to the proposal, this is an intensification of an existing site. An introduction of 4 new residential properties in total would naturally generate the need for additional parking on the street. There is no information in the submission to suggest that additional parking exists. The introduction of 2 new builds in such a small area of the site, in my opinion, leads to cramped former development. 2 new build flats also do not meet the nationally prescribed space standards. I strongly believe that 2 additional buildings are an overdevelopment of an area that measures a width of 4.8 metres by 8.9 metres in depth. Given HMO and other apartments in the existing building, it would be attractive to use this area for outside space. Building adequate bin stores for both commercial and residential properties. There is simply not enough space for commercial bin storage plus ×6 bins for yoga studio, residential bins for upward of 15 people, bike store and heat source. I think she means air source heat pumps. In summary, the main concerns are the lack of information regarding noise and odour, lack of information regarding additional need on on-street parking, new build element is not conducive with the grade 2 listing, overdevelopment of a very small area, location of the commercial bin store on the plans is incorrect, correct location would block our fire exit, and 6 bins required would not fit without blocking the fire exit. Proposal leads to a cramped form of development, does not meet minimum space standards, and a lack of planning conditions for obscure glazing and surface management plan. The need to meet government targets for housing should not have detrimental effects on the area or the conservation area or to existing occupants. The new properties will be cramped and surrounded by bins for those living in the tiny space with very little light, of which is overlooked by a distance of 1.5 metre bedroom to the studio. George Street is not a big street with small pavements and busy walkways with existing residential properties around it. Where are all these bins to be sited on collection day? Given the above concerns, it's requested that planning permission for the 2 new builds is refused, or at least the application deferred whilst additional information outlined above is submitted and assessed by the local planning authority, and those involved in visiting the site to see the tiny space they are proposing for 2 people to actually live. Thank you for your time. And to the main body of the report. This proposal relates to 16 to 17 Friargate, which is a grade 2 listed building in the Friargate Conservation Area. The building is in the city centre and the ground and first floors are occupied as an existing restaurant. Full permission is sought for change of use of part of the restaurant occupying first floor, second floor, third floor of the building to residential use. Form 3 apartments with 1 and 2 bedroom units and a 6-bedroom HIMO. For the rear yard accessed off George Street, there is proposed to be a 2-storey extension to form 2 one-bedroom apartments. Servicing access for the restaurant and the apartments is via the gated access onto George Street. Bin storage and cycle parking is shown within the rear yard. There's no off-street car parking provided with this development. Received 48 third-party objections. Concerns relate primarily to proposed development of the rear yard and impacts on servicing, access and on the use of the adjacent building in George Street, which is occupied as a yoga studio. The site is a designated heritage asset, as it is a listed building and in the conservation area, and therefore particular consideration must be given to any harmful impacts on the significance and character of those assets. Such that permission should not be granted unless it's in accordance with the heritage guidance in the NPPF. There are considered to be benefits to the listed building from the conversion and reuse of the building for residential use, particularly given the upper floors have historically been residential accommodation and are currently vacant. Following concerns raised by the Conservation Officer to certain elements of the conversion and the new build element, some amendments and additional supporting information has been received from the agent. These have addressed some of the concerns of the officer and who has recommended conditions to deal with the remaining matters. There is considered to be less than substantial harm to the heritage asset caused by the proposed intervention works for the upper floors of the listed building and the development of the new residential building in the rear yard. In accordance with paragraph 202 of the NPPF, the public benefits of bringing the listed building back into viable residential use and forming a high-quality living environment and increased fertility of the city centre carry significant weight. The new extension would also deliver high-quality housing in a well-designed and complementary form, and these benefits are considered to outweigh the limited harm and therefore meet the heritage test set out in the NPPF. The highways officers raised no objections to the proposed residential scheme, given its location within the inner ring road in a highly accessible location. Conditions are recommended for bin management plan, which should be attached. The Environmental Health Officer recommends an acoustic assessment is carried out to inform sound insulation measures for the apartments to minimise any noise disturbance for future residents, given its a city centre location. Housing Standards would licence the HMO and have raised no objections to the proposed internal layout. The apartments and bedroom sizes would all exceed the minimum national space standards, and overall we are satisfied that the residential units would all provide a high quality living environment. In terms of below ground archaeology, the county archaeologist is satisfied with the desk-based assessment which has been submitted and recommends an archaeological watching brief for the new extension, which should be secured through condition. Overall, the proposed residential development would deliver around additional 6 units of new housing in the city centre in a highly sustainable location, contributing to the city's housing supply. The scheme would form a high-quality living environment with no adverse effects on highway network, residential amenity, flood risk or archaeology, subject to the recommended conditions. Heritage tests in the NPPF are considered to be met, and so such approval is recommended. You have one speaker.
Thank you, Sarah. We have Ms. Harvey. Welcome, good evening. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Annabelle Harvey. I'm the owner of the Breathing Space Yoga Studio on George Street. I rent the building, which was part of the historic Gall House estate, and I share access for emergency escape and bin storage across the yard behind the studio where the proposed development is planned. My business is open across the hours from 9 a.m. till 9 p.m, 7 days a week. I have a team of 12 yoga teachers and holistic therapists, and our clients are in the main people who are making steps to improve their physical and mental well-being. Many of them come to yoga on the advice of their doctors. My objection focuses on 5 main points, all of which will have a detrimental effect on my business, on the jobs of the people I employ, and on the community I've created and supported over the last 3.5 years. My points: the reduction of our shared fire escape access, the ill-thought-out positioning of the bin storage, the loss of light to the yoga studio rooms, the negative impact to our fresh air and ventilation, and the negative impact on the privacy of my customers and the occupants of the planned housing. The fire escape across the courtyard is shared with the restaurant on Frygate and the residents of the flats above it. My studio has 2 fire escape doors, both of which open into the courtyard and funnel people through to the safety of George Street. This could easily be in excess of 100 people channeled through an enclosed space which was deemed to be suitable in 2019 when I opened my business and had a fire safety team over to assess it. By adding housing for up to 16 more people in the backyard and reducing what is already a very tight space, I don't believe the area would be legally sufficient to be considered suitable. Further impacting this is the proposed bin store of 6 or 7 large garbage skips on wheels, which are planned to be lined up under the only windows we have in our downstairs studio space, and up to and as far as one of the fire escape doors, impacting our ability to exit safely. The bins would introduce unwanted odours and significant noise to our teaching space. They would stop us from being able to maintain the outside of our building and windows. With the lids up, they'd obscure our light, our fresh air and our ventilation, and furthermore we believe them to be a fire hazard so close to the building in the actual fire escape route. Moving on. Due to the historic design of our building, our windows are, all but one, on the rear side overlooking the courtyard. The building of the proposed apartments will lead to a significant loss of light, and this has been acknowledged by the council. The proximity of the plan, less than 2 metres from our rear wall and windows, will create a direct view from the flats into the yoga studio and vice versa into the bedrooms and living spaces of the future tenants. There'll be no privacy for either party.
Ms. Harvey, I'm afraid I'll have to stop you there.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Sarah, did you want to come back on any of the points?
Thanks, Chair. There's obviously quite a few points which were raised in the statement I read out. In terms of fire escape, they would have to comply with fire regulations under building regulations. Fire regulations are not something we cover under the planning system. The narrowest gap that isn't shown on the plan is 1.56 metres, which is a pinch point, and obviously on the other side it's wider. We would assume that that is a sufficient width for people to pass. In other developments, you normally get up to a metre between houses. So we are satisfied that that is a sufficient, but obviously it would be subject to building regs being achieved. In terms of light, if we show the building and the layout, so you can see, oh sorry, the one before. You can see the new building in blue at the top of the screen. And you can see them on the right is the George Street building, the yoga studio. As you can see, that is north of the George Street building. So it touches the top corner. So I think we were satisfied because of its orientation that loss of light would be quite limited only to that top end of the building. And it is 2-storey to 2-storey. So given its relationship, we are satisfied that there would not be a significant loss of light between the two buildings. In terms of privacy, obviously it's a business premises, and if you look at the photo, there are windows on the back of the building. Some, as you can see, some are covered by steel railings. Some of them are covered by obscure film. So in terms of overlooking, again, I wasn't too concerned that there would be any privacy issues between those two buildings. In terms of bin storage, as those who went on the site visit yesterday saw, there are existing commercial bins in that yard which serve the restaurant and these existing uses within the existing building, and obviously the George Street building. There would be a couple of additional bins proposed to go back to the floor plan. The proposed bins for the residential unit is in the top right-hand corner. I think those two next to the access. There are bins shown also in that area for the restaurant use and for the George Street building use. So again, we can put a bin storage management plan. I thought I had attached one. If I hadn't, we can attach one, which would obviously manage how that is dealt with. I think that's it.
Thank you, Sarah. Members of the committee. Councillor West.
Thanks, Chair. I wouldn't normally mention the things I'm going to mention because they've been covered quite adequately by Ms Harvey and by the statement that Sarah read out. But for the avoidance of doubt, if it comes to it later, my concerns following the site visit yesterday, which was really helpful, were around what looked to be a fire door from the yoga studio into the yard. And the sheer amount of bins that are suggested for that location. I think it says 6 for the restaurant and 2 for the accommodation, which is 8 1,100 litre bins, which will take up a huge amount of space. I'm concerned that no one will have responsibility for putting them back exactly where they're meant to be, and that they may well block gates and fire doors. But also with the creation of further accommodation in that corner, the people who would end up living there would walk out of their front doors into a bin storage, which isn't what I can imagine anybody wanting to live in. It's quite a nice little space at the moment, but if that space is filled with more apartments, there'll be no outdoor space for anybody to sit. And no one will want to because there'll be 8 huge bins sat there. So as I say, Chair, all those points have been covered. They've been explained, but if it comes to it later, I want to have them mentioned now.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Kerr.
I was also on the site visit yesterday, which again I thought was really helpful. We often talk about the importance of amenity open space for HIMOs and for flats. And for some reason, this small courtyard area, which could be a little courtyard garden, is not being considered as a potential amenity outdoor space. And instead, we're making it into a back urban corner and squeezing every ounce out of here that we could. And I think for me, it's over intensive. We've got 2 cycle parking spaces, provided you're strong enough to hang your bicycle up. And that's for 10 HMOs and 5 flats and 2 apartments. It's just not enough. We're encouraging people not to have a car because there's no decent car parking, and yet there's nowhere to be able to easily put your bicycle, and that's before you talk about visitors. So we've now potentially got bicycles lined up against the walls as well as the bins, providing a hazard that isn't being managed by anybody, maybe, because we don't know what the management arrangements are. I'm just concerned that this is something which could go very wrong because of the over-intensive development and the lack of reality in how people actually use spaces for which nobody is really responsible. And I can't see what the management process is for this to ensure that it remains a safe space. And for that reason, I think it's over-intensive with the additional units, new build units on the back. And I'd like advice on being able to support part of the development, because I am really supportive of getting our listed buildings utilised, and I think that there is the potential for good accommodation in the existing building here. But can we do an agreement for part of the application and a rejection of part of the application?
Sarah, I think the application is in 2 parts already.
I think we did see this coming, having been on the site visit yesterday. I think what we'd suggest is we can give the agent applicant an opportunity to reconsider the 2-storey building by deferring this application to the next committee, if members wish. Or we can look at a split decision because the conversion of the building is very separate from the extension element. So it's say those are the 2 options that we can consider.
Thank you, Sarah. Anybody else? Councillor Pott.
Thanks, Chair. Sarah, you mentioned the 1.56 metre pinch point. What's the dimensions of these industrial size bins that are going to be pushed past there?
I personally don't know the dimensions. The comments that Mrs. Cadman-Jones made, she did mention dimensions on them.
Miss Harvey, I take it you know.
I don't know the dimensions, but I know that they're in Rebecca Cadman-Jones' report.
I'm Googling, Chair. Google says they're 1.4 metres high, 1.26 metres wide and 1 metre deep.
If Google says it, it must be true.
Well, if Councillor West said it, it must be true. Anything else, Councillor Potter?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that I was another victim of that site visit on the coldest day of the year. And also, just taking everything into account, it was a very, very tight sort of proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Councillor Olsen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, another beneficiary of the visit yesterday. It was quite helpful in understanding the site a little bit more. I think in principle, it is tight, but I think in general it's acceptable. My concern as Councillor West is about the management of the bin storage areas, and I think 8 of those dumpsters is not feasible in such a small space. So I probably want us to hear a bit more information about what we can do if we could put any conditions in to manage the bin storage area in any way, shape or form. Thank you.
Besides digging underground storage, I don't see much choice there. Anybody else? Well, look, I've been certainly a site I won't forget visiting, because it cost me £194 to get a wing mirror on my car. When I clipped it out when the lorry was there, and I was driving past in George Street with the wheelie bin there. So I'll have to send that bill to either Stephen or Ian, whichever one, right? But aside from that, look, this scheme had a lot going for it, but unfortunately, they just went a bit too far. You know, the courtyard should not have been included in this. It should have remained as that. Now, I don't think any one of us here would like to open a window and have the smell coming from, you know, a bin. It's a situation where they've got windows at the back and the fire doors are there, so if in the summer they want to open them, that smell is going to come inside. And yes, there is loss of light, regardless of how we look at the angles. Obviously, a building going up there will affect the light on the business there, because they're on a low floor. Whilst there may not be invasion of privacy in terms of putting up, you know, obscure glass and what have you, it'll still lead to loss of light. So I suggest, Ian, what Sarah said and you said, that might be a better option if the committee will agree, and that is to go back to the developers and possibly ask them to revisit this application and then see, you know, how they can reduce the impact on the courtyard and the impact on the business on George Street. That is if the committee is agreeable.
Chair, I'd be prepared to move a split decision, not allowing the new build in the courtyard, but allowing the rest to go ahead. And I presume in that case, the applicant would be able to come back and appeal the refusal for the new build.
I'll let Ian explain it, but I'm not in favour of that.
You could do it, Chair, because the elements are quite distinct. I think we've issued split decisions before where there's been very separate elements. You get into trouble where you're trying to split elements that are quite interconnected. I think probably what I would suggest, it's obviously up to you, Chair, but what I would suggest is if we go back to the architect, because it's Latham's, and identify what your concerns are, that you're concerned about the over-intensive nature of the new build component. They may come back with something of a reduced footprint, of a reduced scale, but still something within the courtyard, or they may elect to you know, listen to all your concerns and delete that component altogether. But I think if we just gave them the benefit of their architectural imagination and revisit that component, and I think there's no debate about the value of all the elements within the listed building. That's clearly going to bring it back into a viable reuse, and I think we're just talking about the element in the courtyard. So that would be my suggestion, Chair. You can do a split decision, that is feasible, but the suggestion to go back to the architect in the first instance, and we could re-report this fairly quickly, would be my preference.
Thank you. And before I bring Stephen in, just Councillor Potter, if you want to say what you're saying, then Stephen can give us a overall.
Thanks, Chair. I would support Ian's view on deferring it and asking the architect to look at it again. I would support that.
Yeah, Chair, I was actually just going to say that what Ian proposes gives the committee greater flexibility, I think. So it's probably the more sensible approach.
Are we all in agreement with that? Okay. Thank you. that is deferred. Sorry, we'll go on to 79 Ricknell Road, pages 53 to 65, and to tell us about that is Ian.
Many thanks, Chair. I've nothing to add, apart from inviting Councillor Lonsdale to speak.
Unfortunately,
She's not
Councillor
here.
Lonsdale is not here.
Looking around the room, unless she's dressed as Paul Clark.
No, Clark is looking smart today. Committee, anybody? Councillor West and then Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say, I think at a previous meeting we'd agreed that if a councillor recommending this to be referred to committee didn't attend to speak and there wasn't any other reason for it to come to committee, that we batted it back and didn't discuss it. But it does say that Councillor Kerr has requested that it come to Planning Control Committee. So I saw that after I put my hand up. So I suggest that we let Councillor Kerr speak.
Councillor Kerr, would you like to take up the baton?
Yeah, thank you. And I think one reason why I don't know why Councillor Lonsdale isn't here, but I know her health's not brilliant at the moment. But one of the reasons why we haven't been inundated with the number of formal objections is because we have had a lot of conversations with local people about the arrangement at the moment. So there's been a lot of casework from this. The biggest problem has been the cars overhanging the pavement along that frontage. There's also concerns about the lighting, which is underneath the overhang on the roof. And that has been on overnight quite often. And that is causing concern to some people. But it's it's not a good example of the overhangs. People sent in, I don't know if these photos, some of these may have been sent in via me from people who've been walking down the street. But it's the car parking that is the biggest issue, and the overflow car parking onto the main road, which onto the road there as well, which you can see with people parking quite close to the junction. It gets quite a busy junction at some times of day because we've got a school opposite, and that's causing problems as well. The other thing, we had a condition initially to say that there should be convenient covered cycle parking adjacent to the entrance. So you can see that there is cycle parking shown there, which almost works, but it wasn't actually delivered. And the proposals for cycle parking, which they now have, don't work. I don't forgot the plan for the current arrangement available. But there's car park, there's not that one. There's cycle parking proposed down the side behind the gates, which is obviously appropriate for staff. But if you were to use it, it's so close to the gates that you wouldn't actually be able to open the gates. That's not the right one either. To be able to or close the gates once you put your bicycle in there. And the cycle parking for the visitors is at the bottom of the frontage, sort of the bottom edge of the site there. And the way it's shown, it's not at all clear how you put your bicycle in there or what you're attaching it to. And none of these cycle parking is covered. What is really positive is that they're talking about putting in a travel plan. But even as an ardent cyclist, I wouldn't want to be commuting on my bicycle without a covered place to store my bicycle. And at the moment, they are not providing that as one of the facilities for anybody who chooses to cycle. And we've just improved the cycle route on part of the route to here as well, so that's good news as well. So that's it. That's it. So you appear to have three, on the left-hand side, you appear to have 3 cycle stands which are so close up to the wall that you can't actually, you can only get your front wheel of your bicycle, and I don't think there's space between them to put a bicycle, and your back of your bicycle is now blocking into the gate. Unless you swing it round, in which case you can't get past the first thing. It just doesn't work. And the other 3 bicycles are leant up against the neighbour's wall with not showing any way of which you're securing them, and none of it is covered. So that's what's being proposed to approve tonight. We've got far less parking there than was originally proposed. We've got less parking spaces there now than we've actually got in the current arrangement, which is going to put more pressure on people parking on the street around the junction where we have problems with visibility because the road is relatively narrow. So what we're asking for is to double yellow lines across the junction to enable a better manoeuvrability of vehicles in and out of the junction, and sensible cycle parking that actually works, which isn't included in the conditions we've got at the moment. Oh, and if we can do anything about conditioning the lighting to go off when the place isn't open, that would be helpful as well.
Are you sure you haven't left anything out? Okay.
So, Chair, that's 3 conditions, but I wanted to explain the background to them.
Ian?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kerr, and yeah, I thank Chris for his involvement with this, because we have granted a planning permission. There was a parking layout included, and yes, on the Havenbrook Lane frontage in particular, the original permission showed standard spaces and what's actually achievable in the confines of the site relative to the highway boundary. You end up with reduced size spaces on certain spaces. But I think what we've got in terms of a workable solution is the best we're going to get in terms of the parking arrangement. In terms of the cycle parking, I take your point that we want secure cycle parking because we want people to cycle to premises and have the comfort of and security of knowing that their cycle is safe. So I think I'll go back to, by condition, request that the cycle parking is covered and close to the entrance, because you can see adjacent to the entrance that there is landscaping on either side of the apron, the entrance apron into the facility. So we can deal with that by condition. Condition 4 is drafted, which ties it into the latest drawing, but we can modify that to get improved secure cycle parking. And possibly staff cycle parking. I think we need to look at an internal solution there, Chair, Councillor Kerr. In terms of the traffic regulation order that you mentioned, again, this is something that Chris has devoted some attention to. I've spoken to the applicant, Dr. Tank. He couldn't fund that. It's not something that he could, as part of his operation, he can afford to do, because he would have to pay for it. And then based on that, we've got to make a decision as to what the merits of the scheme are and the planning balance of the proposal. Clearly the community benefits of having NHS dentistry and in a new facility in a sustainable location near to housing and an emerging housing allocation, I think outweighs the disbenefits of there not being a traffic regulation order. I mean, that's something that you can talk about, Chair. That's entirely your call to debate that as members. But what I would suggest is that I modify condition 4 along the lines of what Councillor Kerr talked about in terms of secure cycle parking, and I put an informative note on the decision to remind Dr. Tank that it's cost effective to turn his lights off.
Thank you, Ian.
May I just clarify the how much NHS dentistry is actually happening here? The majority of it is private dentistry.
Councillor Kerr, I don't think we can look at that.
No, Chair, the officer has just said it's a really good thing to have NHS dentists, and I absolutely agree with that. But if you want an appointment, an NHS appointment at this dentist, you're waiting 18 months, which suggests that not many of those appointments are actually NHS slots.
Anybody else?
I'll look at his statement, Chair.
Ian's looking it up for you. Anybody else? Look, it is a dentist. people are not going to be parking there all day long. They'll be coming and going. The benefits, as Ian said, to the community and the emerging sort of housing estates are much needed. And I believe that Ian and I think Paul as well might have been to and fro in with the applicant for a number of months, and he's been very sort of amicable in his dealings, and I don't think there's that much more we can ask. Yes, Lucy's made a good point about the cycles, and Ian can go back, and I'm sure, you know, sorry, what did you say his name was?
Dr. Chang.
Yeah, I'm sure Dr. Chang will see the benefits having, you know, the sort of bicycles covered for people, so when they go into the dentist and come out, their sort of bikes aren't wet, etc. So with that in mind, would anybody like to move it? Thank you. Seconded. All those in favour of the recommendation with the condition?
I think that's 6, Chair.
Okay, anybody against? None. Thank you, that's carried. Right, the last bit on there is potential future site visits. Well, can we have it in a street that's not narrow with no wheelie bin so I don't damage my other wing mirror?
Decide whether you want any, yeah.
Let's have a look first.
You may not want any. This one's in outline, the new outline for Infinity Park. It's the new outline. So all of the areas in red, so, and some of which are bits are being developed already. So, don't want to see that one.
No takers.
This is an outline. This one is probably familiar to you. It's Castle Ward. It's the next 2 phases of the housing-led regeneration scheme for up to 112 apartments and houses.
Yeah, I would actually like to go to that one, especially after speaking about it tonight and having met Compendium before. I'd like to see some of the arrangements they're putting there.
Yeah, I certainly can arrange that with them. It'll be quite a good one to visit.
Is that it?
Not many. Next one is a big outline on AC20 site, 425 outline with access. Side of Heatherton. Allocated site.
Is that it?
Came to committee 9 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I mean, slight delay then.
The next one is from a DRI. It's another amendment to one of their apartment buildings, adding an additional storey onto block E6, additional 21 units.
We'll have a look at that one as well.
And the final one, I think you're probably all familiar with, it's the Derby and Centres proposal for demolition of Eagle Centre Market, Castle and Falcon and various things, which I think you just had a presentation on anyway. So.
No, it isn't.
Walk around the city centre, go in the market. And that is it.
Right, okay. Well, that brings tonight's meeting to a close, and if I don't see any of you before...
Can I just ask why Wellany closed? What happened with that Wellany closed?
Yeah.
The application's been gone since April.
Yeah, there was apparently some issues.
the problems?
Heritage with it.
Yeah, we've just got, Councillor Nawaz, we've just got to cover off some of the issues in the report that have been raised by our Conservation Officer. We just need to make sure that the report properly identifies